Hello everyone, welcome back to the webcast of the Catalysts. I'm glad to see that we are already so many and to welcome Michel Reilhac, our host, our guest today. Actually, we are the hosts. We all reverse today, that's why. We were in orange, now we are in white, because Michel is coming from the future. Obviously, as you can see, he's really literally shining. Anna joined him on this rocket, I would say, and we will talk today about the virtual reality in the post-pandemic age. So we have been in the last 4 weeks speaking more thoroughly about, well, actually immersivity and the way it's going to come into our society even further. So today I'm very excited to welcome Michel to actually finish this series and bring it to the next level. Michel is a narrative architect and a long-time transmedia and immersive media pioneer. He's the head of studies at the Venice Biennale College and the VR competition curator for the Venice Biennale International Film Festival. Since its inaugural competition in 2017 it was. Before that, from 2002 to 2012, he was head of cinema and film acquisitions at Arte France and the executive director of Arte France Cinema. He has been co-producing around 30 international independent feature films each year, including also Lars, Antichrist, Melancholia also. And he was named Man of the Year in 2012 in film by industry magazine Film Français. And he's also a virtual reality filmmaker himself. His piece called Viens was premiered, so to speak, at Sundance in 2016. So I think I said everything, and Michel is very renowned for his visionary, comprehensive and critical understanding in the immersive media landscape and beyond. And I think that it is incredibly great right now that we assess the impact of virtual reality coming from the pandemic and going beyond, and how it will impact our lives after the pandemic, or well, let's say, still with the pandemic and the evolution of the situation that we have today. So what sort of future do we want to create, and what role should immersive media play in it? And I think now the virtual stage is for you, Michel.
Thank you so much, AC. It's an honor to close this series that you've done, and it's at the same time a challenge, because trying to draw a sort of list of lessons we have learned from the crisis and how we're going to move into the future is such a huge topic. We could all talk about this for days, and having to do this in 15-20 minutes forced me to make a selection of a few of those points that I wanted to outline, and that seemed to me to be, the salient points. So I'm going to share my screen with a presentation that I have been doing about this, and bear with me, since it is something, as I said, which is limited to just a few points. The main lesson that I think I have learned on how to position ourselves with VR now is really this idea that the lesson that we have learned from the lockdown, the very direct effect, is that we all crave for IRL, in real life. We need to be together, we need to touch each other, we need to see each other, we need to be social, and there's nothing that replaces being together. And that's the one thing we learned. We knew that we are social animals, and we knew that we needed each other to operate, to function fully, but this crisis has really brought to the front this very, very obvious fact. So how does that fit in with this accepted idea after the crisis that the lockdown has actually accelerated VR adoption? Does this contradict this point? It doesn't, and I'd like to just address why. in thinking about this, I realized that if we want to sort of have a global, a bird's eye view on what VR is today, it's really two things, and two things that apparently can contradict each other. One is obviously providing an escape through virtual worlds that can be completely fictitious, that can allow us to manipulate space. We can fly, we can live underwater, and it feels real. Those games, those experiences, those fictions, those documentaries even can take us to spaces that the physical world does not offer us. But I will not linger on that particular aspect. I want to linger on the second aspect, which I think is how VR offers an opportunity to duplicate, in a way, as faithfully as possible, the real world when we cannot have the real world. By that I mean communication, for instance, when we cannot be with our friends, with people we work with physically. VR is the next best thing. It's not instead of reality, it's the next best thing to reality, reality remaining absolutely vital for us. So I would just like to focus on this particular aspect of what I see as the next best thing to reality. There are two lessons I've chosen that I've learned during the crisis and the intensive use of VR, and with Liz who's here. Hi Liz. Liz Rosenthal and myself, as we have been immersed in selecting the 45 pieces that we are going to be showing within Venice VR Expanded online between the 2nd and 12th of September in Venice. I just chose two lessons. One, the obvious one, VR is better than Zoom. It's better than Zoom because it gives us a sense of presence, of agency, and spatial presence to each other. It also, of course, allows us to use all kinds of tools online that Zoom does not offer. And it is the demonstration is now very, very clear that being in 3D, 360 together provides a much, much better format for being together, working together than any 2D solutions. The second one that was very obvious to Liz and I as we have been working on deciding what kind of platform we should use for VR, Venice VR Expanded, since we are going to be 100% online. We've explored many of the existing social platforms in VR. We have explored the new ones. We have spoken to a lot of people. We participated in the different WhatsApp groups on VR. And the one lesson I've learned is that there are two criteria that you cannot have both at the same time. One is ease of access. By that I mean for ease of access for people who are not already VR converts, who are not in the closed circle of the VR community. And if you want these people to access VR, you need to make sure that they can do it easily, that it's not too heavy to download, that it's not, that the friction is as little as possible. You have that on one side, and the other side you have high quality. When you look at amazing platforms like More, for instance, Museum of Other Realities, or Neos, or Engage, they provide the highest level of quality for the pieces that are shown in those platforms. But the price to pay is a very high friction of access. So I realized that you constantly, when you have to choose, like we have to choose on what kind of platform we're going to design and put together for Venice, you need to choose, do we prioritize ease of access to allow more people to easily join, the virtual experiences, or high quality? For us in Venice, we have chosen absolutely ease of access. We feel that it's part of our mission to make sure that more people can access VR at this time. I have chosen 4 accelerated trends in what we have learned during the COVID, and what I see as the most exciting trends that are going to be happening in the near future. The first one, of course, is the explosion of social VR for communication. We are seeing how the social platforms are offering, like I said, a much better alternative in how we can be together when we cannot be, once again, physically present together. This has been translated by an accelerated blossoming of many new platforms. We have been seeing beta versions, prototypes of platforms that are going to be starting very soon or that have opened very, very recently. Those platforms also understand that there is not one single platform that can satisfy all needs. There is not one platform that is absolutely ideal for spontaneous social networking, for creating together with all kinds of working tools, creative tools, and access to the most sophisticated interactive VR experiences. We're seeing that each of the platforms that are happening are positioning themselves on a more niche part of the communication field or targeting a particular type of public. The existing platforms that have been around for a while, like AltSpace, VR Chat, have seen a huge surge in their use, and they are all looking into how to make the most of this sort of historical advantage that they have in addressing the needs that the community has been expressing now that more and more people are using those platforms. We have chosen, for instance, VR Chat because we feel that for the social dimension of what we want to do, VR Chat is a very easy to access platform. And of course, the question of the avatars is a question that I will address in a little bit. There's a consensus that has risen also from the crisis to say that probably social VR is the next killer app or the first killer app for massive VR adoption. We don't know what's going to happen when Facebook launches Horizon, for instance. We'll see. That would be a very interesting lesson. But without waiting for this massive, social network to implement VR, and it's long overdue because if we remember when Facebook acquired Oculus back in March 2014, it was with the intention to make VR the next best step for a social platform. That time is coming now. It took about 6 years for it to to be developed, but we're about to see this soon, maybe at the end of the year, maybe early next year, and it'll be a lesson. But we don't need to wait until Facebook launches Horizon to see the appetite for social activities through VR, and the immersive dimension of what everything does already in social network is going to be a massive accelerator for global VR adoption. The second accelerated trend that I see is how social VR is a collective creative tool. It's so interesting to see how those platforms are trying to adapt the techniques that we use, a whiteboard, stickers, even clay modeling, building of mock-ups, storyboarding collectively. All of these are incredibly exciting to do. But beyond this, what we have also seen is how much a social platform can be a place where we can gather in a different way. We've seen the concerts. Vroom did the Jean-Michel Jarre concert very recently, and that was extremely successful, even though it also had its problems of access. There were on Fortnite, we know of different concerts that have happened even since a year and a half ago with the Marshmallow concert, which was the first one on Fortnite. Those big events have proven that those social platforms can be, and by social platforms, I include those massive online game platforms like Fortnite, for instance, that can host thousands, hundreds of thousands of people at the same time participating in the same event. Of course, we've seen, all of us, how having to work from home has completely changed our priorities, and particularly for those of us who had to travel so much for our work, we're all totally reconsidering what it means to travel. I mean, the carbon footprint is a concern for everyone, and we're seeing how there are now alternatives. And when you can not just talk to each other, but when you see that by using the social networks, you can actually work and produce assets together collectively, that changes the whole thing. And that's where I find that there will be the most impact in the work environment, including the real estate field of renting offices. I think co-working spaces will be successful in that sense, you know, for local audiences, but big buildings with offices to rent may face a very, very serious crisis. Of course, those platforms also are giving us incredible creative opportunities. I was telling AC when we were talking privately before this talk that one of the most exciting things I want to do once the Venice Festival is over, I absolutely want to start building the house of my dreams. Since I'm a teenager, I've dreamt of a house that has water and forest and everything, and to make it in real life would probably cost 40 million euros. I'm going to be able to build it now on a platform and invite my friends, have parties there. There are all kinds of things that I see as an expansion from the real life options that I have to be creative. The third accelerated trend, which is I find very exciting, is the global phenomenon of digital twinning. And by digital twinning, I mean several things. The first one is topography. When you see, for instance, the example of the city of Helsinki in Finland that has scanned basically the city and reproduced the city entirely to allow virtual events to happen in the city for habitants and for visitors, I find this a very, very interesting example of what's about to come. I would love, for instance, to be able to convince the Venice Biennale to scan, to do a volumetric capture of the city of Venice, so that we could do treasure hunts in it, we could do events in it, and we could do gatherings and creative and artistic events in a virtual environment. Private places is the same. I think that when we start having the option of creating a photogrammetry of the place where we live, for instance, we can then step up to the next level in being together virtually with our friends when, once again, we cannot be together physically, which will always be our preference. But when we cannot be all of us together, I think that being able to host an event in our home where our friends can be friends who have been in our home already, that will be a very, also a very exciting use of VR then. Avatars is a big thing. Right now, we're seeing, and we've been seeing this during the lockdown, we've been seeing all kinds of prototypes, companies that are now allowing you to create a realistic rendering of your avatar just by using a picture of your face that can be stuck on an avatar. This kind of technology is going to be refined and is going to be developed to the point where, and we've seen, for instance, the prototypes that Facebook and Oculus have been sharing, you know, on how soon we will be able to actually duplicate ourselves so that our avatar can be a realistic copy of ourselves. This is something that is going to be happening very soon. The last one of the accelerated trends I wanted to share was something that I find, by having used the platform so much in the past few months, is what I call cross-platform consistency. By that I mean, right now, if you go on VR chat, you need to have your avatar in VR chat. If you go in Engage, you have a different avatar in Engage. If you go to Neos, you have a different avatar in Neos. What if we could have avatars that could be enabled with artificial intelligence, using, embarking assets that would be stuck to the avatar, that would be part of the avatar, and the avatar, our avatar itself, would become an AI vehicle that would be able to interact with other such avatars with simple tasks that could be done by them while we can take a nap. This is something that is happening. We're seeing prototypes of this, and I think it's one of the very exciting trends that has been accelerated by the crisis and that will develop. Of course, transportability of the avatars across platforms is also something very exciting. If I take great care of building an avatar that truly looks like me, and I will need that, all of us, we will need to take great care of our avatar in the platforms we use, because they will represent us in this added dimension of our reality. So how we look, even how we're dressed, will be more and more important as we go along. So as we take care of developing those avatars, we would like those companions, these digital twins of ourselves that we will have, we will want those digital twins to represent us everywhere we go. Regardless of the platforms we will be on, we will want those avatars to be there for us and with us, representing us. Transportability of those avatars across platforms is a trend that I find extremely exciting and interesting, because it will give consistency to our presence online in the VR social platforms. So just as a conclusion, because I think my time is over, as a conclusion, I just wanted to say that these are just a few of the lessons learned, and I could go on for hours, about much more. But we are seeing that definitely the crisis has accelerated awareness around and interest around VR. It has piqued the interest of communities that were not so interested before. And that has made VR and the VR community take a few accelerated steps towards mass adoption. We're not there yet, but there's definitely been an acceleration. And I was reading this morning an article about the more global issues that said that some people were saying that we may have accelerated by 10 years the process of adoption or development of low-key trends that are now becoming more obvious in our everyday lives. So I'm very excited and very optimistic in how VR is growing, is also maturing, and just let me say for the last thing, we, as I said, we just locked our selection for Venice with Liz, and we're very, very excited by the level of creativity, the diversity of VR experiences, and the diversity not only of technologies used, but of points of views and ways of telling stories. The field is blossoming, and it's an incredibly exciting time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michel. This is wonderful. And I must say, this is the first talk we have with so many private messages coming up to us, like, I need to ask this, I have to leave, but I need to ask this. People are already into the debate. So we have a couple of questions we will ask, even if the people are not there anymore. But there are critical questions also. So that's really exciting, I would say. So, Joe, do you see a question you would like to start first?
I have an interesting and practical question from Wendy Bernfeld. Thank you, Wendy, for sharing. So Wendy asked, for those without all headsets or without headsets at home who are participating or viewing Venice VR, will there be an LBE location for appointment viewing? So apparently, like in Cannes, there was a way to kind of do this. And I'd be curious to know what the solution would be, or that you've planned for Venice VR.
Yes, this is a very good question. Thank you, Wendy, for asking. We are going to have a physical location in Venice. because the International Film Festival is going to be happening physically. All the theaters will be open and everything will happen normally, except for Venice VR. And the reason for this is that the building of VR Island on Lazzaretto Vecchio costs a fortune, and with the risk of having very few people, especially from Asia and from North America, it didn't make sense to undertake this kind of expense this year. So we're going entirely virtually, but we will have a place in the Excelsior Hotel, for those of you who know the Lido in Venice, with the market, where we will be able to host a small VR theater where people will be able to access the platform with headsets that we will have available there. But we're also doing something very exciting this year, which is very new. We are creating a network of satellites. So we are collaborating with institutions in many different cities across the world, who we are offering to open a Venice VR Expanded. We call this version of Venice VR this year Expanded because it's entirely online. They will create a lounge for this, and it will be open to the public. People will just maybe pay a ticket for an hour or 2 hours worth of viewing, and they will have access to the platform through these satellites. And right now, the cities that are already confirmed are Paris, Montreal, Amsterdam, Portland. We're talking.
Berlin.
Berlin is in discussion.
I hope.
So is Beijing, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, Rio, and Barcelona. We're working with a lot of different contacts right now to create this network. Hopefully, we'll have about 20 cities where this will be accessible.
Okay,
Amazing.
That's very cool to know. Yeah, exactly.
Great. I mean, I have one more question also from Kathleen Schroeter. Kathleen, do you want to also share, maybe personally? Otherwise, I can ask the question. So, Michel, you mentioned the kind of narratives that are circulating around Facebook Horizon. Kathleen actually asked, do you think that Facebook's Horizon has the potential to level up the mass market adoption in the next couple of years? So maybe on a longer time scale. Do you have any predictions about the impact of Facebook Horizon, even if we don't need to wait for it to get stuff rolling?
Liz and we have tried to extract information about this from Oculus in our conversations with them. So can you tell us approximately when this will launch? But we don't have any, confidential information about that. But what I mean, they tried before, with Spaces. It didn't work also because they didn't do any kind of marketing or any kind of push. So I think the acceleration effect that Horizon may have will be entirely in proportion of the marketing effort that Facebook is going to produce for Horizon. If they keep it as low key as they did with Spaces, it's not going to make any difference. I think if they feel confident enough in what they're doing, and they feel that it's strong enough to go for it and really promote it in the within the Facebook community, then it can have definitely a very strong impact on massive adoption. But it's really, in my opinion, up to how they launch, when they launch, and the kind of effort they're going to put into. I think it's also connected with what Apple is going to do. I mean, that we keep hearing about Apple, not doing anything, but we keep hearing about licenses that they're buying. We keep hearing about companies that they're buying, and we keep hearing about those hundreds of people working secretly, on VR for Apple, but there's no announcement. And I don't know if they communicate or how they do, but I guess there is an underground sort of war, and who's going to release when. So there's no announcement for Apple, but once Apple enters the field either of AR or VR, that's going to make a big difference. And I'm sure that this is going to happen in the next couple of years.
That's really interesting. AC, did you want to follow up on that with
I
a
have so
question of
many
your own?
questions, and actually I have a question. I have a question, actually not to follow up on that, but to jump to the avatar question, which is actually touching the question of trust. Your fellow speaker, Caroline Sinders, who is also in our agency, she's a machine learning design researcher and an artist, was writing yesterday on Twitter, is it wrong to be skeptical of anyone in 2020 who has an anime avatar? So it's not exactly a VR avatar we're talking about, but she's suggesting, she's posing actually this question about the trust. Can we trust who is there, who is not there behind all these avatars? So Michel, I wanted to extend the question to you today.
We have not had the time, to address the ethical and moral questions and issues behind all of these transformations, but they're very obvious. The question of identity is going to be one of the highest psychological challenges that will walk hand in hand with the massive adoption of VR. When you can indeed be someone else, in virtual worlds, and when you can communicate with other people through a chosen identity, when you can have multiple identities in this way, of course, the issue of who you are is raised, and the authenticity of who you are is raised, because there is, you can fully claim that your physical identity, the one you've been born with and that you're living with in the physical world, that identity is no longer your primary identity if you spend all your time, in VR worlds. Your fantasy identity becomes more you than your physical identity if no one sees you, if you stay in your room all the time. So those issues of identity, defining identity, will be just the same as defining reality. Of course, physical reality will always remain supreme, because if we don't feed ourselves, if we don't drink, if we don't sleep, we die. And then there's no VR for us. So there is a supremacy of the physical world as opposed to the virtual world. But in terms of identity, there's no supremacy of the physical world. There will be an administrative identity, for, citizenship, for physical life, but the weight of that identity is going to diminish for those people who feel happier in, in the next equivalent of Second Life in VR. So,
absolutely.
Those are tricky issues.
Yeah, so the mix of, the evolution of social media, marrying now the virtual reality or immersive reality component, plus adding the AI on top of this to make us really like totally multiple, agile, efficient, with multiple identities will certainly be one of the scenario of the futures. I just wanted to know, on your personal opinion, do you actually think that within the next couple of years, actually, maybe 5 years, that we will be living our lives primarily virtually, or do you see this on a further horizon?
No, as the crisis has taught us, we need physical interaction, totally. So I think that, like with everything else, we're going to learn to navigate a hierarchy of different realities. At the top of that hierarchy will be IRL, will be real life. The same way meeting in real life already is at the top of our hierarchy, of the quality or the importance of the moments.
Like
and
presence being the really ultimate luxury good,
exactly.
so to speak.
Presence, exactly. Presence will be the haute couture of physical presence will be the haute couture, or the gastronomy of communication and social interaction. And way at the bottom of the scale will be, text message. And in between, there will be everything else. This is why I'm saying, to me, what is very obvious today is that in terms of this communication aspect, VR is the next best thing to reality. It will be right under physical presence. So it would be the prêt-à-porter of compared to haute couture, or to you know, a nice restaurant as opposed to a gastronomy restaurant. So it's going to be something we're going to learn to use a lot, but we will definitely learn to alternate moments that will be physical, and those moments will be the most important ones and the most precious ones, with moments that will be virtual when we cannot be physical, for instance, or it doesn't make sense to travel across the world for, you know, for a couple meetings, those kinds of things. So it's not an either or solution. It's going to be a mix. Reality is going to become a sort of millefeuille, a sort of multi-layered thing that we will keep, you know, accessing exactly like we do in communication today. You know, it's not the same thing when you call your friend on the phone and speak to them live as you do if you do a WhatsApp message or a video message or a recorded message or just a very simple text message. We already have that in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I want to add, still, we need to be careful here, because obviously we're not only talking about privileges of well-equipped people with multiple identities. Some of these virtual identities can be essential for people who are marginalized, who don't want or cannot live their real life in the surroundings where they are. So I think it's interesting also to have this perspective on this. There was a note on this in the chat. Joe, do we have a next question? Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Anne Pfeiffer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Anne is asking, what about augmented reality? So could augmented reality also be an alternative tool for meeting virtually, or do you have any thoughts on this, on where it's not total immersion, but still a more dimensional way of interacting with people digitally?
I'm a bit skeptical that AR is like a step to VR. I really think it's two different things. I mean, from my experience and viewing, you know, stuff in AR, I think because AR is an add-on to reality, it doesn't follow the same logic. It does not require the same availability from the viewer. It does not require the same. It's not the same dimension. I think AR is definitely a very exciting creative field that is, you know, we've only scratched the surface of that. But I really don't think that AR is going to lead people to VR. I think it's really, really different. The simple fact that to experience VR, you need to put on a headset and not just pop out your phone, you know, or your tablet and have those interactions, or even when there will be glasses, you know, to wear. I think the only maybe sort of transition that AR represents to VR is through the AR glasses. I mean, we hear a lot of, you know, stuff about different brands getting ready to launch their AR glasses, Apple, Facebook. Maybe the reflex of putting on glasses on your face to access a digital layer of information on top of reality, maybe that gesture, that use of glasses will make it easier for people to then accept that they would do the same gesture for VR. Maybe that is something, so it's not AR in itself, but maybe the AR glasses that will be a step towards VR.
Very good. Also, a quick note for everybody on the chat. Don't forget to save the chat, because Joe is posting together with Anna really a great a list of resources, documentaries, links, and etc. So I just remind you to click on the file dots options and save the chat. Even if after that, we actually, as you know, record the discussion, we post the discussion on our website, and we add our notes and preparation and notes of the chat and etc. So nothing is getting lost, just to make this clear in this virtual space. So that's good. Do we have another question? Because we have a very a question coming back to the very roots of VR, saying like, yeah, VR can be also a bit difficult. I have to look back at it. Like, VR can make actually people sick. So it's not the fact that it is all the time better than Zoom, and this disproportionately affects women. Maybe this is not unknown, I mean, to you experts of virtual reality, Michel. I think, I don't know if it is just a note or a question that we have to...
I think it's really interesting, and I see Alicia is here. Hi, Alicia, and maybe Alicia could speak about that, because Alicia was on our jury last year in Venice VR, and she has also been a tutor with the college in Venice that we improvised last March, right after Venice shut down, and we transferred in 3 days the workshop from real life to an online platform with VR Room, and Alicia was part of this. And she as passionate as she is about VR, she did agree that it was making her uncomfortable. I have read something about this recently, and also discussed the fact that for some reason, when you watch women who watch Half-Life, are not, for some reason, are not as sick as they usually are. So there must be tricks that we still need to learn perfectly to avoid this. But Alicia, maybe you want to say something about this.
Yes, please, Alicia, go on.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in for a second. I am a person who suffers from simulator sickness in VR, which is why I have generally worked in AR, because it's not an issue there. And in the work that I have done, I came across a woman named Dana Boyd, D-A-N-A-H-B-O-Y-D, who is a researcher at Microsoft, and she goes all the way back to the early days of Jaron Lanier and early VR, in which she was routinely the only woman working in a lab, and she was the only one who would get sick. And she was told over and over again, she was made fun of by her colleagues, like, it's because you're a girl, it's because you're a woman, it's because you're weak. And she really took this on as a research topic, and she found that, in fact, it is true that simulator sickness does affect women at a much higher rate than it does men. And that has been the crux of her research. And so this is something that really does concern me when I hear people saying things like VR is better than Zoom, because it is if it doesn't make you sick. But that week that we spent in VR in doing the Venice workshop, while I'm incredibly grateful that we were able to do it, and I'm blown away by the work that Michel and his team at the Biennale did to make it happen, I would have had a much better experience if it had been in Zoom, because the VR didn't add anything to it except knowing where a person was standing in a 3D space, but it did make me incredibly ill, so that by the late afternoon, I wasn't any use to anybody.
Thanks, Alicia, for sharing this, and put that also in the conversation in. It is not that obvious for everyone. Joe, you are posting great resources here. There is a piece of Dana Boyd that you were mentioning, Alicia. This is great. So for those who want to dig into this, please use the opportunity. And yes, you can also see Alicia in our webcast. She was here 4 weeks ago. Michel, you want to respond to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Alicia, for being so honest about sharing this, because I think, particularly in this time when we're becoming so aware, of racist bias that are unconscious in society and sexist biases that we have in our society, I think it is, there's definitely something that is different in this sensitivity to motion sickness between men and women, then I think it definitely needs to be addressed. It definitely needs to be something on our minds, and we need to, and it needs to be researched. It needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Yes, excellent. We have a next question.
Yeah, actually, Jose Sherwood, would you actually like to share this yourself? Maybe switch on your camera and pose this question that you had. So this is coming back to the topic of not just kind of shared experiences or live concepts, but this idea of creative and collaborative tools for social VR. Yeah, hi Jose, nice to see you.
Hey, yeah, so yeah, it was just really curious. I guess it expands to AR as well, really thinking about how can these tools kind of create collaboration within social VR. I'd be really interested to know more about
Yeah, so any tools that you know of, Michel, like
Oh,
specific
I would
creative collaboration tools?
Yeah, I would recommend, if you're interested in that, that you join the WhatsApp groups that are existing entirely around this. There are different WhatsApp groups. I'll be happy to type in the the names of those groups that are focusing on exploring all of the existing social platforms and working platforms that appear. To date, I think they have counted like close to 40 different platforms existing for work and creative collaboration online. I would strongly recommend you look into that, because naming just a few wouldn't be fair. And it really, now there's a landscape, there are maps that have been drawn, there are comparing charts that have been drawn in, you know, the different pluses and minuses of each of these platforms in relationship with what it is that you want to achieve. So it's a huge topic in the VR community right now, and it is definitely a very interesting one, very, very rich. So you can, let me give you some of the names right now. So there is XR Crowd at Embrace Online. There is well, there is our crowd, which is XR Crowd at Venice VR, that discusses those issues. There is XR Crowd at Zero Event,
which Maria Corsial already
yes,
posted in the chat. This is wonderful.
and there is also XR Super Friends.
Great.
So these are the ones that are the most advanced in terms of comparing the social platforms and the different working tools.
Jose, thank you so much for your question. That was really good. We could have this collaborative aspect in this. Great. I just want to make a last round of questions. Otherwise, we could slowly move to the networking part for another 5 to 10 minutes, if you like. Michel, you still have 5 to 10 minutes, right?
Yes, of course.
This is wonderful. Any other question for Michel?
Oh, Bethany wants to say something.
Hi, how are you going? I just have a question off the back of what you're talking about. Are you finding there's any particular industries that have picked up the use of VR in a work context more than others?
I would definitely say that professional training is really embracing VR in a massive way. Every day you read about corporations, and not always huge companies, sometimes smaller companies, that are using VR as their main training tool. I mean, I was reading a study about Walmart, for instance, who has been testing a VR training program to educate their sales force on how to create empathy with their customers. And so they did that for a year with a limited number of people trained, and it was so successful that they now have made it global to all of their stores, and with apparently a very direct impact on their sales. But there are many, many, many different examples. Another example that I'm really interested in right now, and I'm working on a project specifically in that, is the fashion industry. It's so interesting to see the number of designers and companies in the fashion industry that are now looking at VR as their best way to do their fashion shows. And you can now, for instance, for the Fashion Week in Paris, Milan, and New York, you can, if you're a professional, you can buy a pass that allows you to watch more and more of the fashion shows online and write about them, because you're there, you know, and there's a backstage segment of it. So it's one of the best ways to see those fashion shows. I've heard a lot about the real estate world. I think in the upper part of the market for like the more expensive real estate, it's definitely a tool that everyone is using now. And of course, in training in general, it's so interesting to see in Toronto, the first medical school for training surgeons has shifted 100% of their training to VR as a tool. And there are numerous examples on how VR is already used. I heard last week a friend of mine who's a nurse in Amsterdam at the hospital called me and said, you know, it's incredible. We started using VR for kids in the treatment of pain when they have to undergo painful either surgery or treatments. And we're now using VR, and it's incredible how good the results are. So the hospital is thinking of developing this, you know, to use it as a treatment for pain. So I think there are so many areas, you know, and tourism, for instance, I was talking to someone who's really making money now by selling virtual tourism programs to the elderly in elderly homes, you know, for people who cannot travel anymore, and they can access, you know, a range of world sites, you know, cultural sites and tourist sites like the Taj Mahal, the pyramids and all of that. And people want to pay for this, and he's making a decent money, you know, with this kind of business.
I think we
the
will
best time
see.
for doing tourist.
Yeah,
What did you
Yeah.
say?
The best time to be offering tourist experiences. Yeah.
absolutely.
I
think.
just wanted to react on something that I'm reading, something that Alicia posted, which I think is so deep because it impacts, I think, the philosophy of what we do, where Alicia, you just wrote, we need to make sure we're not designing people out of the system from the beginning. And we have that chance to make sure we don't reproduce the same mistakes that many other fields in the entertainment industry have done. You know, we really have that chance to ask ourselves the fundamental questions of the purpose of what we're doing. Why do we really need VR in our lives? What purpose does it serve? Identify the reasons why we're so passionate about this, but really identify them for a deep way and make sure, and that's certainly one of the lessons of the COVID crisis, is that people come first. People come first out of the fight, you know, in the US for Black Lives Matter, for sexist and racist biases, all of that. We are learning this in the most violent and direct way now. So we should make sure we don't miss that opportunity to learn our lessons. So Alicia, I couldn't agree more with you. Designing people in the system first is really the essence of what we're doing.
I just wanted actually to add to the former question that indeed we have with we are creating new ecosystems within these VR worlds. So there will be economic activity be created from that. So I think this will enhance also the fact that we will move even more to virtual fields to live our lives. So I think, Anna, you did a wonderful research also yesterday on this. You had this link of Cointelegraph. Maybe we can post this. It's a great article. I think that was really great. We have another question. Jo, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're slowly going into the more relaxed networking time, but it's an interesting question on 3D cinema from a person whose account is called Iris Media.
Wolf, yeah.
Yeah, right. Do you want to ask a question yourself? Or otherwise, I mean, the question is the time of 3D cinema gone in the wind? Or kind of, yeah, is this even a relevant thing to think about anymore? Especially, you know, cinemas are also very much struggling during the pandemic. So, yeah. If you have any thoughts on this,
yes,
on 3D cinema in general.
I come from the film world, you know, where I was very, very active for 20 years, and that issue of the theaters and what the theaters can offer has always been around. It's particularly strong now because they're not doing very well. The question is really difficult to answer because there's a lobbying force at work, you know, of the theaters as a business to protect their business. So they're pushing, you know, for cinema in theaters because they want to stay alive and they want to keep thriving. But they're not asking the real questions, you know, of what is the specific pleasure, what is the specific experience that a theater is providing today that streaming a film at home is not providing. And it's not enough to talk about the collective experience. I don't believe that a cinema today provides an outstanding collective experience. I find it quite annoying, actually, you know, to be with people who don't respect the film, who don't behave, you know, in a respectful way. I have stopped going to theaters for that reason. I don't buy that collective experience thing of the cinema in theaters. But I think it could be rebuilt. So the theaters could provide something of an experience if they start asking themselves the question in a different way than trying to pull as much money as possible from the audience. You know, I don't want to go to a theater and have to pay outrageous prices for a drink and for popcorn and feel that this is where they're getting the most money out of me. I don't want to do that. So I think they're asking the wrong questions. So 3D in theaters is treated as a gimmick. If it's an ingredient of a more global, more complex, and more renewed experience, then yes, why not? But I think the reason why 3D may be gone with the wind, it's because it's treated as a gimmick that's going to bring people back in the theater so that they can keep buying popcorn. And this is so wrong. This is not how it should be dealt with. Things change constantly, and streaming at home is definitely a huge competition to the theaters. So they need to answer, what sense does it mean? Why would someone leave their home, the comfort of streaming a film in their home? Why would they go to that theater? What is that theater going to give them that the entertainment at home cannot give them? And they're not addressing that question, you know, really. So it's their loss.
Michel, I'm so happy you're telling this because I totally agree with you. This is also, I don't like to go to the cinema anymore, except it is a very small cinema and there is a lot of room between the seats. I don't have to see people eating or smelling the popcorn. I cannot bear this, actually. So I'm glad you mentioned this. I'm thinking also that streaming is actually offering the opportunity with the watch parties. I remember as I was moderating Kind Next last week or 2 weeks ago, that we were having a guest presenting also the watch parties, which will be also bringing a new economic model behind this. But the collective will be still possible if it is not a physical collective experience. There will be the possibility to be experimenting at the same time in the same virtual place, or say same kind of place in real time, at any case at the same time, these cinematic experiences at least. Yeah, okay, do we have another question? I mean, I would say we are anyway still already together and networking. We're still 17 people here in the room, so it's a little bit less crowded than before. And if you want to, I mean, we can stop the recording. You can open up your cameras and say hello to Michel or say hello to us. You know, we are real people.